You don't remember me, do you? The white tea pillow.
She bent down, set the plate, and whispered, "You
don't remember me, do you?"
you? In that moment, the billionaire CEO realized the note in his hand could ruin everything. Althea Carter was 24 years old, a young black woman with tired eyes and a quiet fire inside her. She worked as a waitress in a high-end steakhouse in Chicago, a place where men in suits never looked her in the eye and women clutched pearls when she walked by. She had learned to smile through the whispers, to balance heavy trays while balancing heavier thoughts. But tonight was different. Tonight she saw a face she could never forget, sitting in the corner booth, commanding the room with his silence. Lawson Drexler, billionaire, CEO, untouchable. His presence froze her. He ordered a steak, rare, with the same dismissive tone she had heard from countless men before him. Yet something in her chest twisted. This wasn't just another rude customer. This man had destroyed her world years ago. She knew it, deep in her bones. Her hands shook as she placed the silverware, her breath quickening. She slipped a folded piece of paper under the edge of his plate. No one noticed. No one cared. But she knew the weight of what she had just done. Lawson picked up the note with a casual flick, as if brushing off a crumb. But the second his eyes scanned the words, his face drained of color. The confidence in his posture vanished, his hand trembling against the leather booth. The restaurant noise faded. Forks paused mid-air. A billionaire, pale and silent, trapped in a moment he couldn't buy his way out of. Althea stood nearby, steady now, watching his mask crack. And then his lips parted, barely moving, but enough for her to see the horror behind them. Something had pierced his chest deeper than any blade. Lawson Drexler had just read a truth he had buried, and it left him frozen. Before this night, Althea's life was made of double shifts, aching feet, and prayers whispered on crowded buses. She worked mornings at a diner, nights at the steakhouse, and still it was never enough. Her mother's medicine bottles lined the counter at home, each one a reminder of bills unpaid. The restaurant's shiny chandeliers and polished marble floors never matched the emptiness in her pockets. She was polite to customers who made jokes at her expense, who snapped fingers when they wanted water, who called her girl as if her name didn't matter. She learned to swallow the sting. But deep inside, Althea carried a story no one at the restaurant knew. A story of a father who once held her hand through school plays and whispered bedtime prayers. A father who lost everything when a man in a suit decided his life was disposable. Her father, a janitor at Drexler Industries, was accused of theft. The story spread fast, the humiliation faster. They said he stole equipment, money, even respect. He swore his innocence, but no one listened. He was fired overnight, his name dragged through mud he could never wash off. They lost their home within months. The shame ate at him until his heart gave out one winter night. Althea was 17, holding his cold hand in the hospital, whispering promises through tears. "I'll make them remember who you really were, Daddy." Tonight, that promise returned with a vengeance. The man at the corner booth, the billionaire sipping wine without a care, was the same man who had signed the papers that ruined her father's life. And now he sat in her section, demanding steak, never knowing the waitress before him carried the ghost of the man he betrayed. Althea remembered that day as if it had been branded into her skin. She was in high school, clutching books that smelled like old paper, when her father came home early. His shoulders sagged, his lunchbox still full. He couldn't even look her in the eye. "They said I stole," he whispered to his mother. "They said I lied." His voice broke, and Althea had never heard him sound so small. She peeked from the hallway, watching the strongest man she knew collapse into a chair. The world didn't stop for their pain. Rent notices stacked on the
You
counter.
don't remember me, do
Friends
you?
vanished. Neighbors whispered. Her father spent weeks fighting, begging for someone to believe him. No one did. At Drexler Industries, the word of the CEO carried more weight than the truth of a janitor. Althea's grades slipped. She skipped dances, skipped laughter, skipped childhood. Every dream she had was buried beneath the rubble of her father's disgrace. Yet through it all, she clung to one image, the smirk of the man who shook hands at press conferences, who pretended to lead with honor. Lawson Drexler. Her father died with that man's name heavy on his chest, a stone pressing down until his last breath. At the funeral, Althea made a silent vow. She would never forget, and never let Drexler's face slip from her memory. And here he was now, older, richer, but with the same cold eyes, the same mouth that once spoke lies to destroy her father. The man who stole everything was sitting only a few feet away. Her pulse raced, her hands damp against the order pad. She thought, fate doesn't give warnings, it just delivers. And tonight, fate had delivered Lawson Drexler into her hands. Althea's mind spun. Should she confront him? Should she scream across the restaurant, tear down his polished image with words sharp as glass? Or should she stay silent, like the world had stayed silent for her father? The risk was crushing. Her job was all she had. Her mother's face flashed in her mind, frail in a small apartment wrapped in a blanket against the Chicago cold. If Althea lost this job, the medicine stopped, the lights stopped, their life stopped. Fear tugged at her, whispering to keep her head down. But rage was louder. Rage reminded her of her father's calloused hands, his tired smile, the way he kissed her forehead even when the world treated him like dirt. Rage whispered, "Don't let him win again." Althea reached into her apron and pulled out a napkin. She didn't write a letter. She didn't need paragraphs. She wrote a sentence, sharp and simple, words her father never got to say. With trembling fingers, she folded it and tucked it beneath Lawson's plate. She turned away, her breath ragged. Her chest pounded as though she had just set fire to a building. She felt the air shift, heavy with something unspoken. Lawson picked up the napkin absent-mindedly, expecting a number from some desperate waitress. But as his eyes scanned the words, his jaw locked. His pupils shrank. His hand, steady for decades in boardrooms, began to shake. The room didn't know. The waitstaff didn't notice. But Althea saw it. She saw the power bleed out of him in an instant. And then his lips parted as he whispered, "This can't be her." Lawson Drexler was a man who had conquered cities. He built towers of steel and glass, crushed rivals with handshakes that doubled as knives. People feared him, people respected him, but no one made him tremble. Until tonight, until the note. The napkin sat on the table like a curse. Just one line, yet it pierced straight through the armor he had spent decades building. His heart raced as memories long buried clawed back into the light. He saw a face from the past, a man who once trusted him, a man whose downfall was Lawson's victory. Lawson sipped his wine, trying to hide the shake in his hands. But the taste was sour now, metallic, bitter like guilt. He remembered the press conferences, the staged outrage, the convenient scapegoat. He remembered the janitor, quiet, hard-working, disposable in the eyes of the company. What the world never knew was that Lawson had orchestrated it all. Not because the janitor was guilty, but because Lawson needed someone to take the fall. He had embezzled, manipulated, clawed his way to power, and someone else paid the price. That someone had been Althea's father. And now his daughter stood before him, in a waitress uniform, staring with her father's same eyes. He tried to look away, but her presence burned. Guilt gnawed at him, threatening to rip him open. For the first time in decades, Lawson felt small. He pushed the plate away, unable to touch the steak. He didn't care about food. He cared about the ghost that had just risen in the form of a young woman's note. He slammed his hand on the table, startling nearby diners. "Get me that waitress," he demanded, his voice hoarse. The restaurant fell silent. Althea froze. Lawson Drexler wanted her brought to him. Now. The restaurant froze when Lawson Drexler demanded the waitress be brought to him. Conversation stopped, forks hovered mid-air, and all eyes turned toward Althea. People whispered, curious why a billionaire would summon a server with such urgency. The air felt thick, like the walls themselves were waiting. Althea's knees trembled, but she straightened her back. Each step towards his table felt like a march into battle. The sound of her shoes against the marble floor echoed louder than the clinking glasses around her. She knew eyes were on her, judging, waiting to see what would happen. When she finally reached the booth, Lawson's stare locked onto hers. His pupils darted across her face, searching, almost desperate. Althea didn't blink. She wanted him to see the fire in her eyes, the same fire that had burned in her father before the world crushed him. "Sit," Lawson said, his voice low but commanding. She didn't move. Her silence was louder than words. People nearby leaned closer, some pretending to sip drinks just to eavesdrop. The tension thickened until it nearly choked the room. Althea leaned forward slightly, her voice steady, almost too calm. "Do you recognize me?" she asked. Her words sliced the silence clean in half. Lawson swallowed hard, his lips parted, and the words spilled out before he could stop them. "Your father took the fall for me." The entire restaurant seemed to gasp, though no one else truly understood. But Althea did. The confession was enough to shatter the walls she had built around her pain. And at that moment, the billionaire who owned towers of steel had just admitted to a crime he could never bury. The words echoed in Althea's ears. "Your father took the fall for me." It felt unreal, like the villain in a story finally removing his mask. Yet here it was, in the open, undeniable. A lifetime of suspicion and pain had been confirmed in one whispered sentence. Lawson's voice cracked, something rare for a man who spoke to boardrooms filled with sharks. "I built everything you see on a lie," he muttered. The world outside still thought he was untouchable, but at this booth he was just a man unraveling in front of a waitress. The less extreme moment came with his sudden vulnerability. His hands trembled as he confessed details. He spoke of rivals closing in, of desperate choices, of pushing the blame onto a loyal man because the empire had to survive. He admitted it, piece by piece, like poison leaking from an old wound. Althea's chest heaved. She felt rage twist inside her hotter than ever. Decades of family pain condensed into a single moment. She slammed the plate down so hard the silver rattled, glasses toppled, the room jolted. "Do you know what you did to us?" she hissed, her voice sharp enough to cut through every whisper in the restaurant. People turned, some stunned, others pretending not to watch. Lawson looked down, ashamed, but shame didn't heal the scars she carried. He had stolen her father's dignity, his livelihood, and his life. And then it happened. Althea's hands shook as she let go of the plate, letting it crash to the floor. The sound rang out like a gunshot, and the entire room gasped in horror. The billionaire flinched as though he had been struck. The manager rushed over, red-faced, his polished shoes squeaking across the marble. "What is going on here?" he demanded, his voice filled with panic. The other waiters whispered, some covering their mouths, worried this was the end of Althea's job. Althea stood still, her fists clenched, eyes locked on Lawson. Fear clawed at her. If she lost this job, everything collapsed. The medicine, the rent, her mother's care, all gone. The thought twisted her gut like a knife. The less extreme moment came as she lowered her gaze, heart racing. She thought of running, of apologizing, of letting the moment slip away. But her father's memory stood taller than fear. She couldn't back down now, not after what Lawson admitted. Before the manager could speak again, Lawson lifted his hand. His voice cut through the room like thunder. "Leave her. She stays." The words stunned everyone, especially Althea. Her manager's jaw dropped. The billionaire who once crushed men without blinking had just defended a waitress who had humiliated him. Whispers turned into murmurs, curiosity thickening around the tables. Something strange was happening, something no one could explain. Lawson leaned back, his eyes still locked on Althea. "Meet me tonight," he said firmly, "privately." His tone carried no threat, only a heavy weight of unfinished truth. Gasps rose again from nearby diners. The room buzzed with questions, but Althea's mind swirled with fear and fury. What could a billionaire possibly want from her after everything he had just admitted? The downtown hotel lounge smelled of leather and old money. Althea sat across from Lawson, the lights dim, the silence louder than the music playing faintly in the background. She felt out of place, a young woman in a cheap jacket facing the man who once ruined her family. He started slow, voice trembling, as if admitting sins to a priest. "I was young, ambitious, terrified of losing everything I worked for. When the scandal hit, I needed someone to take the fall. Your father, he was the easiest target." He paused, his hands tightening around his glass. The less extreme moment revealed Lawson's pain. He spoke of his own father, a man who demanded success at any cost, who taught him that power mattered more than people. He described his rise through greed and betrayal, each step leaving behind broken lives. Althea's throat tightened as she listened, but her anger boiled. Tears pricked her eyes, not from sympathy, but from rage that he dared justify himself. "You destroyed my family," she spat, her words shaking. "Do you think sitting here telling me your sad story changes that?" Lawson's shoulders slumped. For once, he had no rehearsed speech, no sharp defense. He looked like a man facing the mirror for the first time in years. But Althea wasn't finished. Her voice rose, trembling with fury, loud enough that the bartender glanced over. "You watched my father die from shame, and now you sit here expecting me to feel sorry for you?" Her words cut through the air, leaving the billionaire speechless, drowning in guilt. Lawson broke the silence with a desperate move. He pulled out a checkbook, the paper crisp under his pen. He scribbled a number so large it almost seemed unreal, slid it across the table and said, "This will change your life. Take it for your mother, for yourself." Althea's breath caught. The check glared up at her, zeros stretching further than she had ever seen. Her mind flooded with images. Her mother's medical bills paid, their apartment saved. No more double shifts, no more exhaustion. For the first time in years, freedom felt within reach. The less extreme moment softened her anger for just a second. She thought of the relief it could bring. She thought of buying back lost time, of laughter returning to her mother's face. For the first time, temptation pulled at her heart. But then her father's face flashed in her mind. His tired eyes, his broken spirit, his funeral with barely enough money for flowers. Money didn't erase that. Money didn't bring him back. Money didn't clear his name. Althea's jaw tightened, her fingers gripped the check, and then, with a slow, deliberate motion, she tore it clean down the middle. Gasps filled the quiet lounge. Lawson's eyes widened, disbelief twisting his face. The paper fluttered like ashes between them. She leaned forward, her voice steady as steel. "I don't want your money." The check, a billionaire's weapon, lay in ruins at his feet. And for the first time, Lawson Drexler had nothing to offer. The check lay in pieces, fluttering to the floor like dead leaves. Lawson Drexler, a man who bought everything and everyone, stared at Althea as though she had spoken a language he could not understand. For the first time, money had failed him. He leaned forward, voice low, almost broken. "What do you want from me then? Tell me." The arrogance was gone, stripped away like paint on rusted steel. He wasn't the CEO now, he was just a man drowning in guilt. The less extreme moment revealed his loneliness. He spoke of a mansion with silent halls, a wife who had left years ago, children who barely called. Billions in the bank, but no one to share them with. His empire felt like a cage, not a crown. Althea sat in silence, watching him unravel. For years she had dreamed of this moment, Lawson Drexler begging, desperate. She felt both satisfaction and confusion. Could she really trust him to change, or was this another performance from a man who lied for a living? He gripped the edge of the table, eyes locked on hers. "Help me make this right, please." The word please sounded foreign in his mouth, a billionaire reduced to pleading with a waitress. And as the tension hung between them, Althea realized she now held the kind of power her father never had. Althea broke her silence with words sharper than glass. "If you really want to make this right, then clear my father's name, publicly. Tell the world you lied. And not just for him, for every family you destroyed on your way up." Her demand sliced through the dim lounge. Lawson stiffened. Public confession meant more than shame. It meant ruin. It meant lawsuits, investors pulling out, his empire collapsing overnight. His jaw tightened as he weighed the cost, the fear flickering in his eyes like a storm. The less extreme moment came as he hesitated, calculating. "You don't understand what this would do to me," he whispered. "I'll lose everything." His voice shook, the fear of a man who had never lived without power. Althea's hand curled into a fist. "My father lost everything, and you slept just fine." Her voice grew louder, shaking the silence. "If you don't speak, I will. I'll tell everyone what you did." Lawson's chest rose and fell. He wasn't facing an employee anymore. He was facing a storm he couldn't contain. The threat was real. And in that moment, Althea knew she had flipped the balance. For once in his life, the billionaire had more to fear from her than she had from him. The press conference was packed, cameras flashing like lightning, reporters jostled for space, hungry for a story. Lawson Drexler stood at the podium, pale, his tie loose, sweat beading across his forehead. Behind him, screens glowed with the Drexler Industries logo. The world was watching. He cleared his throat, gripping the sides of the podium. For decades, his words had built empires, but now they threatened to burn everything down. The audience leaned forward, holding their breath. The less extreme moment came as he paused, glancing at the front row. Althea sat there, her arms folded, her eyes steady. Her presence was the anchor, reminding him of why he stood here. Finally, Lawson spoke. His voice cracked. "I am here today to tell the truth.
You don't
Years
remember
ago,
me,
a
do
man
you?
named Samuel Carter,
Why
an
do you?
honest employee, was accused of crimes he never committed. I let the world believe he was guilty. The truth is, he was innocent, and I was the guilty one." Gasps erupted. Reporters shot questions like bullets, cameras flashing furiously. The room shook with the weight of his confession. Althea's chest swelled with emotion. Her father's name was spoken, not in shame, but in honor. The ghost finally lifted. But as the words echoed across every news outlet, Lawson's body swayed, his face pale. He gripped the podium, his breath short. And then he collapsed. Chaos broke out as Lawson hit the stage floor. Reporters screamed, cameras still rolling. Medics rushed forward, flashing lights cutting through the madness. The mighty billionaire, once untouchable, now lay vulnerable before the world. He was rushed to the hospital, his empire crumbling in his absence. Investors fled, the board stripped him of his seat. Headlines read, "CEO confesses, industry shaken." The world finally knew the truth. The less extreme moment brought a rare smile to Althea's mother. Sitting in their small apartment, she heard the broadcast. Tears slipped down her cheeks, but for the first time in years, they weren't from sorrow. "Your father can rest now," she whispered. Meanwhile, Althea watched from the hospital hallway as doctors fought for Lawson's life. The man who once seemed like a giant now looked small, fragile, mortal. Nurses whispered about stress, guilt, and a heart too heavy to carry. Her feelings tangled. He had ruined her family, yet he had just redeemed her father's name. He was both enemy and savior, sinner and penitent. And when the doctor finally emerged, shaking his head, Althea braced herself for what came next. Lawson survived, but barely. He lay in a stark hospital room, machines beeping, his body thin beneath white sheets. The man who once signed billion-dollar deals now struggled just to breathe. Althea entered quietly, her shoes soft against the linoleum. He turned his head slowly, his eyes meeting hers with a mixture of shame and relief. For the first time, there was no wall between them, just raw, human honesty. Lawson reached for a folder on the bedside table, his hand trembling. Inside was a document already signed. He had transferred part of his fortune to a foundation in Samuel Carter's name, dedicated to helping workers who had been wrongfully accused, families who had been broken like hers. Althea's throat tightened as she read. This wasn't just money, it was legacy. It was justice carved into history, where her father's honor could never again be stolen. She leaned closer, her voice steady, soft, but filled with the weight of generations. "You finally gave back." Lawson closed his eyes, a single tear slipping down his cheek. And for the first time in decades, he looked like a man who could rest. If this story shook you, imagine the hidden stories we haven't told yet. Subscribe to Hidden Worth Story, where every tale reveals a truth that money, power, and lies can't bury. Don't just watch, be part of the voices that must be heard.